Okay, so we're talking about Lamb to the Slaughter, and we're talking about plot as it relates to Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl. This is our general story map. So we have setting that goes to rising action, that goes to the climax of the story, falling action, and resolution. I wish that this little line was a bit more dramatic, but this is the gist of what's in the plot. So I'm going to break down each of these, and what I am hoping that we can do is identify how this plot is structured and organized. So plot has all of these things. I kind of like this one. It's a little bit clearer, so I threw this visual in, that we've got the beginning, a middle, and an end. And this is the way that the writer uses suspense throughout the story. And this is the way that all good stories are written. Sometimes if it's a really long story, this might repeat. Like if anybody's read like Name of the Wind, that's a long one, and that has some great like little mountains, but then it will ultimately have a larger overarching mountain like this. So I'm going to exit me because I'm just way too big on this. Plot is our setting. The fancy way of saying that is exposition. So when you start reading a story, the author is going to tell you or give you clues. When in history is this happening? They'll also say, where in the world is this happening? Where in all of the galaxies of human imagination is this happening? And then what characters are in there? And they'll start to characterize their characters and give them personalities. So that's what happens in the beginning of every story, is that the author will either use a combination of telling or direct characterization or indirect characterization to tell you these things. Okay. So once we know who's in the story, then we can start seeing conflict emerging. It's a very boring story if there's no conflict. Now, it might make for kind of a nice day personally, but it's a boring story if nothing happens. If you wake up and your mom has made you your favorite breakfast, and then you realize that your favorite show just got like another season released, and like we find out that, you know, we wake up and it's just the sun is shining and it's beautiful, and you're like, Mrs. Leggett, I'm already bored. But if you wake up and you realize that your alarm clock is late and that your computer charger is dead, like that, those acts of conflict are what make a story more interesting. So I'm not going to get into all the different types of conflict, but you will have conflict between like you and the world, or you could have conflict between yourself, and you can have conflict between characters. Conflict between characters is most common. You also have an inciting incident. That's not exciting necessarily. Sometimes it is, but it's the clue and it's the taste of what is to come. So in our particular story, we have an inciting incident between that conversation between Patrick and Mary. So when Patrick comes home, now she is in conflict, and we can see how she negotiates around things. The climax. This is the moment of peak suspense. This is often when the reader has made their big choice, or it's like the last battle scene. It is the confrontation of conflict. It might just be a one-on-one conversation. If you're a Lord of the Rings fan, there's this moment when Gandalf is like, look to my coming at light on the 5th day at dawn, look to the east. And then he's like, and then a whole other army starts cresting over the hill, and you're like, yes, he did it. That moment, that suspense, that build up, this is the climax. Once they start cresting over the hill and the battle is going, and you're like, oh, I can see the direction that this is going, that's your clue that we're now into falling action. Once the decisions of the characters have taken their course, and it feels like you might be able to see the end in near, and the conflicts are winding down, that's your falling action. This is often when you jump up in your seat, or you're just like, yes, I can see that this is happening. And resolution is typically, it's more calm. It resets the stage, and the character sees how their life is going to be changed, or how they're going to resume their life. The conflicts are generally settled. If they're not settled, then you can be prepared for a sequel. And so if it has a cliffhanger ending, then that's still the resolution. It just leaves you wanting more. So it's okay to have like resolutions and plot endings here. So I'm going to tell you pretty briefly some things in here. In our next assignment, I'm going to be asking you to be mapping these out and to be comparing them. So if you're someone who like takes notes, this is a good time to take notes. So let's start plugging this in and comparing this to our current story, which is Lamb to the Slaughter. So what I would recommend doing is, y'all are freshmen. You're not expected to remember all of this stuff and to keep it in your brain. You are expected to take notes and start using your resources to make you a more resourceful human being and a more resourceful student. So what I would do is open up a tab into K-12, get into the content if you haven't already, and we're going to start identifying the different pieces of plot within the story. This isn't a trick question. I'm going to ask you this later. So please follow along. So when you're in content, it'll pop you into Unit 2, and you want to pull up the text. I would really pull up the text rather than the audio. The audio is great, don't get me wrong. I love good audio, but this is a little bit easier. Okay. So at the start of this story, we are getting the setting. Okay, that's not a trick question. Our setting tells us about what the room looks like, what the environment looks like, what Mary is doing. So we're seeing when this is taking place, and we're also given some clues as to when this happens. The sideboard behind her with this bar set up, this is very 50s, 60s. It's very much of that genre. And so of the wife sitting and knitting, that gives us other clues that she may not be employed, which clues us into the time period. We find out that she's pregnant and that she's married, and now we see like Patrick coming in. So what we can do is, if you're like taking notes, you can put something like this in. Let's see, how big can I make this? We have the setting, when and where. So the where is somewhere in the Western world. We don't know exactly where this is taking place, but it is in the Western world, and we're going to say mid-1950s. So these are the clues that our author has been giving us. The characters involved, we have Mary and Patrick. And then what do we know about them? She's pregnant. He's a police officer. Well, he's a detective, but close enough. Where do my buttons go? I want my buttons. There they are. So that's some things that we know about them. And then we get into the rising action. So when Patrick comes home, now we are starting to get into the rising action. Especially, we have clues that there is conflict between Patrick and Mary because of what Patrick dropped, some sort of a truth bomb. We never exactly know what he says, but whatever it is enough to just set her off, you know. Now, this is where some people differ in terms of what they consider an inciting incident and what they would consider the climax. So some people would say that her killing her husband is the climax of the story, even though it happens kind of earlier. I would argue that it's another piece of rising action, and it's that a continuation of Patrick saying that terrible news to her that shocks her. So I would say when Mary kills Patrick, this is the big inciting incident, because this is what like determines the whole rest of the story. So because she kills Patrick, now she's getting an alibi and going to the grocery store, and now she returns home and is like, oh, Patrick, oh my gosh, as if she didn't kill him. And then we have to wonder though, like when is the most intense moment happening? So was it when she killed Patrick, or was it intense when she was at the grocery store? Was it intense when the police came over? Was it the most intense when they were finally eating the leg of lamb? So we have these different plot points, and now we have to sort of piece them together by the definitions of our story. We can even kind of work a little bit back. So we could say our following action, our resolution. Ultimately, what happens with the resolution? She's free. Like, she gets away with it. As far as we know from the story. Other things that happen is the police eat the leg of lamb, which is the murder weapon. And so that kind of leaves us to wonder, though, what is the most crucial moment in here? Like, what's the most suspenseful moment? I think it's hard. You can argue something. This is kind of what I like about English, is that if you can argue something well with evidence, then you might be right. And some people might say that the police eating the leg of lamb might be more of the climax. I think the climax is the conversation with her and Detective Noonan trying to get him to eat the leg of lamb, because that's where the suspense keeps building and building until he finally agrees that they're going to take a break and take care of that murder weapon for her without even them knowing that. That's my guess. You may find something more appealing than that. But that's what I'm leaning towards. So the climax is the discussions between police, Noonan, and Mary. I think that because until they start eating the leg of lamb, it's still very possible that they think that she did it. And once they've made the decisions to start eating the leg of lamb and they agree, then we can start seeing, oh, is she going to get away with this? And we start seeing the resolution of the story. Okay, so this is what I would argue is our plot point. You could have something slightly different. That's totally fine. There are more plot points that go in between. I just did like a quick highlight of some of them. What I am going to be asking of you is I may ask you to put some things in order. I may ask you, in your opinion, what is the climax and why? So like a 2-sentence response, something like that. So those are some things that you can be thinking about, and you could have a ready answer for when we see each other again on Friday. Okay. Other things.